And I think this is the good news for teachers. And maybe tell me what you think about this. It's like education actually doesn't need to change that much. Like to your question about computer science, like we still need to teach students computer science because their ability to be really effective vibe coders, if that's what we're going to call it, will actually be predicated on whether they have the ability to evaluate and critically analyze the outputs and debug, and also the computational thinking skills. Um, and and those students that have that knowledge are going to be by far the best able to add more value alongside AI. And so, and then the other good news is that I don't know that education really is going to have to solve the problem of teaching students to use these AI tools. I think the tools, it's like we didn't have education didn't have to solve the problem of teaching students to use their phones. And I think in large part, the same goes for like the internet and social media. Like these are technologies that kind of by design become sort of like ubiquitous and seamless. Um,
So I agree with you, but I have a couple of hot takes here, and have a few ways in which I think there are some pressing questions. So one of those I think is when you look at education, I completely agree with you that it remains vital and more vital than ever. That if an LLM can produce a 10-page report for you, your ability to read and understand and build your own knowledge from that report is critical. That the LLM can't just download the information into your brain. We're still hopefully many years away from that scary reality. But it's all to say that that sort of becomes, we'll live in a world of more information, not less, right? That's certainly something that we know is true, that information is not going to become more scarce. And so your ability to parse it will become more critical. There are more immediate challenges, though, of like, what does education look like today? You're talking about middle school students, and it's wild to think that a 10-year-old, a decade from now, this question of is it AGI a year away or 2 years away? It doesn't really matter. It's going to come whenever it comes, and there's no one definition of it. It's, lots of definitions. But 10 years from now, we know the world's going to look quite different than it does today. And we know it's going to the world today looks quite different than the world 10 years ago did. And so we've been worried about driverless cars, for example, and that is another huge impact on society. And that's taken a lot longer than people have expected to become this ubiquitous thing. But, my friend was just in LA and in a driverless car, and it was driving him around the city, right? So it's like these things are real now. And so I do think if we take a 10-year horizon, I do think there are a couple of really critical things that we do need to do now. One of those is when you look at ELA instruction, one of the big changes over the last 10 years has been towards less fiction writing and more nonfiction writing. So when you looked at English education, one of the big heavyweights in this space was a woman, Lucy Calkins, and she ruled the roost when it came to literacy. And she really loved fiction writing, getting kids to write stories about their lives. And it was a really fun and engaging experience for kids, but it didn't build the critical thinking skills in the way that a nonfiction text does, where you have to build an argument, you have to find sources and evidence to support it. And so when you looked at classroom instruction, about 90% of writing was fiction writing, and about 10% was nonfiction. And there's been a big push to shift so that maybe 70% is nonfiction and 30% is fiction. I love fiction writing. It's not that it should go away, but kids need to be given these opportunities today. And so if you really look at what's happening in classrooms, how much nonfiction writing is happening, sort of directly connected to how quickly and how effectively we're building critical thinking skills. So that's one really critical question. A second, though, is like, what should computer science education look like? And should we keep teaching JavaScript to students, for example, which has become the mainstay? And I know I'm sort of stepping my foot into a very hot water here, but I expect that in a couple of years, like, we won't teach JavaScript as the primary language that kids engage with as their CS classroom. And I don't think CS classrooms will go away. I think they'll become more vital, but that classroom will look quite different. And I do think that having coding skills is important, but if there's not an economic driver of that skill, if JavaScript isn't a language that we use anymore because your Figma designs turn into front-end code automatically, what is the role of JavaScript in that world becomes a big question mark. So I do think those are some of the questions that aren't happening today, but will happen within the next 2 years.